Coca-Cola CEO says it may ramp up use of plastic bottles and raise prices due to President Trump's 25% tariff on aluminum imports.
Something serious is happening. The CEO of Coca-Cola just said prices might go up again. And even worse, the company may stop using aluminum cans and switch to cheaper plastic bottles. Why? Because of the heavy 25% tariff President Trump put on aluminum that comes from outside the US. This is a big deal. Coca-Cola uses tons of aluminum to make its cans, and most of it comes from Canada. But now, with this new tax, the cost of making each can has jumped fast. Coca-Cola is now thinking of moving part of its business out of the United States altogether. That's not a small decision. It's a sign that something is badly broken. And it is already happening. Right now, Coca-Cola is already sending workers home, and people are angry that American workers are losing their jobs at Coca-Cola. Take note that Coca-Cola has been perhaps the most important company on the US stock exchange for many decades now. It has been the biggest component of Warren Buffett's investment, and millions of Americans depend on these stocks for their retirement. If Coca-Cola fails, it could easily be the biggest disaster of the Trump administration. This is not looking good. Before we go further, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because this isn't just about soda cans. This is about the growing cracks in America's economy. And what's coming next might affect everything from what you drink to whether you still have a job. Coca-Cola, like many companies in the US, buys most of its aluminum from Canada. That's because it's been cheaper and easier to get it from there. Canada sent $11 billion worth of raw aluminum and aluminum products to the US last year, making it the #1 source of aluminum imports, according to data from the US Commerce Department. Altogether, the US imported $27 billion worth of aluminum in 2024. This aluminum also came from other countries like China, Mexico, the United Arab Emirates, and South Korea. Meanwhile, the US exported about $14 billion of aluminum to other parts of the world. But now, things have changed. A new 25% tariff has been added to Canadian aluminum entering the US. This means companies like Coca-Cola will have to pay a lot more to get the aluminum they need to make cans. And that extra cost is likely to be passed on to the people buying the products. You, the customer. According to Alcoa, one of the largest aluminum producers in North America, which has its headquarters in Pittsburgh but does a lot of its aluminum work in Canada, the new tariff could cost US customers an extra $1.5 billion to $2 billion every year. Not just that, but also about 100,000 jobs could be lost. That's a big hit just for using the same metal as before. So why doesn't the US just make more of its own aluminum? The answer is cost. Aluminum is very expensive to produce because it takes a lot of electricity. Countries like Canada can make it more cheaply because they use lower-cost hydroelectric power. A 2022 report by the Congressional Research Service, a non-political government agency, explained that it's just not cost-effective for the US to produce aluminum on its own without spending a lot more money. Even though the US aluminum industry employs 164,000 people directly and 272,000 more indirectly in jobs like mining, construction, and manufacturing, the country still depends heavily on foreign aluminum to meet demand. This new tariff is not just about aluminum. It's a red flag for how American businesses are struggling. In a notable shift, American consumers are reducing their snack purchases, a trend signaling deeper economic concerns. PepsiCo, a major player in the snack industry, reported a 1.8% decline in first-quarter revenue, amounting to $17.9 billion, and a 10% drop in net income to $1.8 billion. This downturn is attributed to increased costs from tariffs, such as a 25% levy on imported aluminum and a 10% tax on concentrate produced in Ireland for the US market, coupled with decreased consumer spending. The impact extends beyond PepsiCo. Chipotle experienced its first same-store sales decline since 2020, citing reduced consumer spending due to economic uncertainty and new tariffs. Similarly, Procter & Gamble lowered its sales and earnings forecasts, pointing to escalating costs and shifting consumer behaviors. These developments suggest a broader trend of consumers becoming more cautious with their spending, particularly on non-essential items like snacks. Factors such as inflation, tariff-induced price increases, and overall economic uncertainty are contributing to this shift in consumer behavior. According to Coca-Cola's CEO, James Quincey, the struggle with affordability didn't suddenly begin in 2025. Inflation, the rising cost of goods and services, has been building up for several years now. Poor and working-class families have been hit hardest by this, both in the US and in other parts of the world. For them, basic items like groceries and household goods have become harder to afford. Coca-Cola, which sells beverages in more than 200 countries, has seen this trend coming for some time. Trump only came to make it worse instead of addressing the issues. Because of this, big companies are being forced to rethink their entire business strategies. They are not just reacting to short-term problems. They are trying to figure out how to survive in a world where people cannot spend the way they used to. This is reshaping the way global brands operate. Even more concerning is, Coca-Cola is now seriously considering leaving the United States. The company is looking into relocating its headquarters and some of its core business operations to another country. This dramatic shift is being driven by US trade policies, especially the aggressive tariffs imposed under President Trump. These tariffs are making it harder and more expensive for companies to operate across borders, which is especially damaging for businesses like Coca-Cola that rely on international supply chains. If Coca-Cola leaves, it won't just be a business decision. It will be a major break from American history and culture. CEO Quincey has made it clear that the company can no longer ignore the risks caused by protectionist trade policies. And with other countries like Canada and China starting to fight back with their own tariffs, the pressure is growing. Companies like Coca-Cola are being forced to choose: stay in a country that keeps changing the rules, or move to a place where doing business is more stable. Coca-Cola failing as a business is not something any American would want to imagine. Beyond its fizzy sweetness and red-labeled nostalgia, Coca-Cola represents something much deeper. It is the strength of American enterprise, the resilience of consumer capitalism, and the staying power of global branding. Founded in 1886 and publicly traded since 1919, the Coca-Cola Company has long been regarded not merely as a beverage corporation, but as an economic institution. With a market capitalization consistently hovering around $250 billion in recent years, Coca-Cola is one of the largest non-tech companies on the S&P 500. Its operations span more than 200 countries, employing over 80,000 people directly and supporting millions more indirectly through bottling partners, logistics providers, advertising firms, and retail ecosystems. In fact, for every Coca-Cola employee, there are potentially dozens supported through the value chain, from sugar farmers in the Deep South to truck drivers in the Midwest to recycling plant workers in California. Now imagine the unthinkable: the collapse of Coca-Cola. Such a scenario would not merely represent the failure of a single corporation. It would send a seismic shockwave through the US economy and beyond. The Dow Jones Industrial Average and S&P 500 would likely reel, as Coca-Cola is considered a blue-chip stock, one of the most reliable and mature holdings in American portfolios. A sudden collapse would trigger massive portfolio rebalancing, panic selling, and likely contagion across other consumer staples like PepsiCo, Nestlé, and Unilever. Given Coca-Cola's dividend aristocrat status, paying and increasing dividends for over 60 years, retirees, pension funds, and institutional investors would be among the hardest hit. Moreover, such a failure would deeply damage investor psychology. Coca-Cola has historically been perceived as recession-proof, surviving the Great Depression, World Wars, oil crises, the 2008 financial meltdown, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Its stability sends a broader signal that certain consumer habits, like the universal craving for a cold, carbonated beverage, are immutably American. So what is happening right now is historic. Let's take a step back and look at how much Coca-Cola depends on other countries for survival. The company's global supply chain is extremely complex. Coca-Cola doesn't just make drinks, it brings together ingredients, materials, and equipment from all over the world. Aluminum for cans comes from Canada. Sweeteners are sourced from Latin America. Special flavorings are imported from Asia. The machinery used to produce and bottle Coca-Cola's drinks often comes from Europe and elsewhere. But this carefully built network is starting to break apart because of new tariffs and trade restrictions. The price of aluminum has already jumped. Sweeteners and flavorings are becoming more. The price of aluminum has spiked, and sweeteners and flavorings aren't far behind. Coca-Cola is feeling the squeeze on all sides. It faces a harsh dilemma: raise prices and risk losing customers, or absorb the costs and see profits vanish. Neither option is sustainable. CEO James Quincey has hinted at a possible third path: relocating operations to countries with more stable trade conditions. But switching from cans to plastic bottles isn't just a change in packaging. It's a warning sign. Coca-Cola is being forced to make tough decisions to survive. Those decisions could quietly lower quality, undermine environmental standards, or even alter the product in ways consumers won't immediately notice. This pressure isn't unique to Coca-Cola. When President Trump told Walmart to eat the tariff, he was sending a message to every major brand: absorb the cost or else. But what happens when that's no longer possible? To keep prices steady, companies may start changing recipes, trimming production costs, or cutting corners wherever they can. And this isn't just speculation. It's already happening. Under tariff pressure, some are skipping safety tests, delaying quality control, and quietly lowering standards just to protect profits. The product may look the same on the shelf, but the hidden cost could be weaker quality, more plastic waste, or even risks to consumer health. It's a hidden crisis. On the surface, the product looks the same, but the reality behind the label is shifting. What's on the shelf may no longer be what we think we're buying. And the question now is, how far can these companies go before the illusion breaks? Retail giants like Walmart, Best Buy, and Mattel are all sounding the alarm too. They've warned that they simply can't keep prices down forever under Trump's tariff plan. But the White House doesn't want to hear it. The message remains: figure it out, or else. So now we're stuck in a silent war between politics and products. Consumers think they're being protected from inflation, but what they're really getting is downgraded goods. Products might look the same, but behind the label, everything is changing. If companies are punished for raising prices, they'll find other ways to cut corners. And in the end, we all pay the price, just not in dollars. In a surprising twist, Coca-Cola and PepsiCo are now in serious trouble after being hit with a major federal lawsuit. The government of the U.S. Virgin Islands has taken them to court, claiming that both companies have been misleading people about how recyclable their plastic bottles really are. According to the 42-page lawsuit, Coca-Cola only used 14% recycled plastic in its bottles in 2022, and Pepsi used just 6%. This is a far cry from their public promises about going green and protecting the environment. The lawsuit accuses both companies of false advertising and unfair business practices. It says they made their products look eco-friendly while doing very little to reduce plastic waste. Officials say this plastic pollution is harming the local environment and even putting people's health at risk. Microplastics, tiny bits of plastic, have been linked to diseases like cancer, dementia, and heart problems. The Virgin Islands are especially worried because tourism makes up 60% of their economy, and plastic trash on beaches could drive tourists away. At the same time, Coca-Cola and PepsiCo are under heavy pressure from the U.S. government in other ways. Tariffs on imported aluminum have made it too expensive for them to keep using aluminum cans. But the government doesn't want them to raise prices either, because that could hurt consumers. So their only real option left was to switch to plastic bottles, which are now the reason they're being sued. It's a no-win situation. They can't use aluminum, can't raise prices, and now they're in trouble for using plastic. This leaves both companies trapped in an impossible bind. If they can't use aluminum cans without swallowing massive costs, and can't switch to plastic bottles without being sued, how are they supposed to operate at all? Their only options may be to fight back in court or start moving operations abroad. Either way, it signals a dangerous shift. When America's most iconic brands are caught in a web of conflicting policies, what does that say about the direction of the U.S. economy? We'll be watching closely as Coca-Cola prepares its next move. Will they stand their ground, relocate, or take the government to court? Subscribe now and turn on notifications, because what happens next could shake the foundations of American business.